There is a very familiar moment that almost everyone has experienced, but few people dare to say out loud. In the morning, standing in front of the mirror, your hand unconsciously touches the lower belly, gives it a light squeeze, and it is still there. That stubborn layer of fat hasn't disappeared. Even though you've eaten healthy, tried walking more, even skipped meals before. In that moment, the feeling isn't just disappointment about appearance. It goes much deeper. It feels like a quiet whisper in your head. Is my body working against me? And science shows this clearly. You are not weak. You are simply misunderstanding how the body actually works. The belly fat that bothers you the most is not ordinary fat. It is visceral fat, a living, biologically active tissue that releases inflammatory signals, disrupts insulin, and directly affects the liver, pancreas, and metabolic system. It does not just sit there waiting to be burned. It has its own defense mechanisms. That is why eating a little less or exercising a little more often fails to touch it. The key lies in insulin. Every time you eat, insulin rises. While insulin is high, fat cells are locked. The body cannot burn fat, no matter how hard you try. This is why so many people fall into a draining loop. Eating less, exercising more, yet belly fat stays exactly where it was. Intermittent fasting is not presented as a trend, but as a biological switch. When you stop eating long enough, insulin drops, and only then is the body allowed to open its own energy reserves. But this is where most people give up. Around 6 to 12 hours after your last meal, the body becomes uncomfortable. Intense hunger, brain fog, irritability. Many people think this means they are damaging their body. In reality, this is glucose withdrawal. For years, your body has been fed constantly. When that easy fuel supply disappears, it reacts like a child having a familiar object taken away. Around 12 hours, liver glycogen runs out. The body panics. It sends strong hunger signals to force you to eat. This is the most dangerous moment, not because you are about to collapse, but because you are very close to the metabolic switch. If you get past this stage, around 16 hours, something strange happens. Hunger suddenly drops. The mind becomes clearer. Energy increases. This is when the body switches from burning sugar to burning fat. Science calls this the metabolic switch. When fat is burned, fat molecules are broken down, transported to the mitochondria, and converted into energy. And here is a detail that sounds unbelievable, but is absolutely true. Most fat leaves the body through your breath as carbon dioxide. You are literally breathing out belly fat. At the same time, noradrenaline increases, making you more alert and focused. Growth hormone rises sharply, helping protect muscle. The body is not foolish enough to burn the engine before using stored fuel. As long as you keep moving and using your muscles, the body preserves them. And even deeper, when it is not busy digesting, the body activates autophagy, the cellular recycling system. Damaged proteins, old cells, and inflammatory components are broken down and reused. This is one of the reasons fasting is linked to anti-aging and long-term health, not just weight loss. The most important thing this material wants you to understand is not fast longer, but restore metabolic flexibility. A healthy body is not one that is always eating, and not one that is always fasting. It is a body that can switch between using sugar and using fat without panic, without exhaustion, without being controlled by hunger. And if you have ever felt dependent on mealtimes, snacks, or the feeling that you must eat now or you'll crash, that is not your fault. It is a sign that your body has forgotten how to open its own energy reserves. If you see yourself in this story, tap like so this video can reach others who are quietly struggling with belly fat and low energy. And if you want to keep understanding your body through real science without fear, without false promises, subscribe to the channel. Not to chase trends, but to gradually take back the biological control that was always meant to be yours. There is a critically important scientific detail that if you do not understand it, will cause you to do everything right and still fail. And that detail lies in how the body learns metabolic habits over time. The human body does not change after just a few days. It changes after signals that are repeated long enough. When you practice intermittent fasting for the first time, the body reacts strongly because it does not trust you yet. Biologically, the brain and endocrine system are constantly asking, is this an accident or is this the new rule? If it is only a single abnormal day, the body resists. If it becomes a repeated pattern, the body adapts. Metabolic research shows that after a few weeks of consistent fasting, baseline insulin levels drop and insulin sensitivity improves significantly. This is crucial because visceral fat does not disappear from calorie deficit alone. It disappears when insulin no longer dominates the intracellular environment. When insulin stays low more often, fat is no longer protected, and the body begins to treat it as a normal energy source rather than an untouchable reserve. Another real-world observation: many people report that after some time fasting, they no longer experience intense hunger like before. This is not because they have become numb, but because the hunger hormone ghrelin begins to reset its secretion rhythm. Ghrelin operates on habit. If you are used to eating at 7 in the morning, it rises at that exact time. When the habit changes, the hormone changes with it. This is why, after a while, skipping breakfast feels light instead of torturous. Another point that very few people talk about: fasting exposes your true relationship with food. When you are no longer eating on a fixed schedule, you begin to distinguish biological hunger from emotional hunger, stress eating, boredom eating, or habit-driven eating. Neurologically, this reduces unconscious activation of the dopamine reward system, the mechanism that pushes you towards sugar and refined carbohydrates when you are tired. And here is a foundational scientific fact: the human body was not designed to digest continuously from morning to night. Digestion is a highly active state that consumes energy and generates oxidative stress. When you give the body periods of not eating, you are not only allowing fat burning, but also allowing the digestive system, liver, pancreas, and immune system to rest. This explains why many people experience reduced bloating, lower inflammation, improved skin, and better sleep when fasting is done correctly. But one very practical truth must be stated clearly: fasting is not a miracle, and it does not compensate for a chaotic lifestyle. If you fast and then break the fast with refined sugar, ultra-processed foods, or eat while rushed and stressed, you are sending conflicting signals to the body. Biology does not respond to slogans. It responds to repeated behavior. The most thought-provoking question in this entire story is not how fast or how slowly belly fat disappears, but a deeper one. What are you teaching your body every day? That energy is always available and must be constantly replenished, or that the body is capable of self-regulation, adaptation, and repair? Science shows that when you give the body the chance to remember that ability, many things change at once. Not just waist size, but energy levels, mental clarity, emotional stability, and a sense of control over yourself. And that is why, for those who truly understand it, intermittent fasting stops being a weight loss method and becomes a way of living that is less dependent, more sustainable, and more aligned with human biology. If you follow the material closely, you will see that the author does not describe these time markers to scare you, but to decode the very real sensations the body creates. Because if you do not understand them, you will misunderstand yourself. In the first 6 to 12 hours, your body is not lacking energy. It has simply lost its familiar supply. The brain has been accustomed to running on a steady intake of glucose for many years. When that glucose flow stops, the brain sends discomfort signals to push you back toward the old behavior. Hunger at this stage is neurological and habit-based, not about survival. That is why you feel hungry, yet can still work, still move, just with more discomfort than usual. Many people mistake this sensation for dangerous low blood sugar, when in reality, blood glucose remains within a safe range. At around 12 hours, as liver glycogen nears depletion, the body enters what biology calls metabolic stress. This is when hunger signals peak, not because you are about to run out of energy, but because the body does not want to switch fuel sources yet. Switching fuel is costly. It is like restarting a system that has not been used for a long time. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. If eating is enough to solve the problem, there is no reason to activate a more complex mode. This is the breaking point for many people. They eat precisely when the body is closest to adaptation. And every time this happens, the body learns a very clear lesson. Apply enough discomfort and food will arrive. Next time, the body creates discomfort earlier and more intensely. If you do not eat at this stage and continue fasting for a few more hours, something interesting happens at around 16 hours. The body realizes that the old strategy no longer works. Insulin drops low enough, and as insulin falls, a cascade of other hormones is activated. Glucagon, adrenaline, noradrenaline. This is when the metabolic switch occurs. Hunger does not increase. It decreases. The mind becomes less foggy. Energy stabilizes instead of fluctuating. This goes against many people's intuition, yet it is completely logical from a biological standpoint. Once the body begins burning fat, energy no longer depends on the next meal. It comes from a large, stable reserve that is always available. And it is precisely at this stage that fat, especially visceral fat, begins to be released. Not because you are burning more calories, but because the hormonal barrier has been opened. The body finally allows access to the energy stores that were previously locked away. The most important message this part of the material wants to convey is this: the sensations during fasting do not reflect danger, but rather how familiar or unfamiliar the body is with that state. The worst sensations often appear right before adaptation, and the more comfortable sensations usually come after the body has accepted the change. If you have ever quit because you believe that my body is not suited for fasting, it is very likely that you stopped right before the moment the body began to understand. And once you grasp this, fasting stops being a test of willpower and becomes a process in which you observe, understand, and cooperate with your own biology. Rather than fight against it, if everything so far still sounds like theory, then look at very real, repeated observations we see in people who practice intermittent fasting seriously. The first thing that usually happens after a few weeks is a change in the sensation of hunger. Many people say that before, they could not skip a meal without trembling, feeling weak, or becoming irritable. But after a period of consistent fasting, they can go longer without eating without panic. This is not because they have better tolerance, but because the body has relearned how to access stored energy. When fat becomes a familiar fuel source, the brain no longer sends emergency signals every time the stomach is empty. The second observation is more stable energy throughout the day. Many people were previously used to an energy spike after meals, followed by a sharp crash a few hours later. When fasting is done correctly, this pattern decreases noticeably. Energy becomes flatter, without high peaks and deep lows. This is a classic sign of reduced glucose dependence and improved insulin sensitivity, something documented in many metabolic studies. Another easily observed change is that waist size decreases before body weight. In clinical reality, visceral fat often responds to fasting earlier than subcutaneous fat. Some people see little change on the scale in the first weeks, yet their clothes fit looser. The abdomen feels less hard and less distended. This is an important marker, because visceral fat is the type most directly linked to cardiovascular risk and metabolic disorders. In addition, many people report improved concentration after the 16-hour fasting mark. This aligns with data showing increases in noradrenaline and BDNF when the body shifts into fat-burning mode. Instead of post-meal sluggishness, they feel mentally clearer and able to work for longer stretches. For people who do cognitive work, This change is easy to notice and hard to ignore. Another practical observation is reduced cravings for sweets and snacks. When insulin no longer rises and falls constantly, the brain's reward system is less overstimulated by sugar and refined carbohydrates. People begin to distinguish true hunger from eating out of boredom or stress. This is a deep behavioral shift, not because of stronger willpower, but because the biological baseline has changed. Finally, a particularly noteworthy sign is improvement in health markers among people with mild metabolic issues. Lower fasting blood glucose, reduced triglycerides, and improvements in bloating, low-grade inflammation, and chronic fatigue. These changes usually occur gradually but consistently, and they reflect exactly what science predicts when baseline insulin decreases and the body is given regular breaks from digestion. These real-world observations show that intermittent fasting is not a test of endurance or a method of suffering to get thin. It is a way of placing the body into a biological context it was designed to adapt to. When the context is right, the body self-adjusts. And it is precisely this quiet adjustment that is most convincing, because it does not come from belief, but from changes you can feel and measure in everyday life. There is one very important point that needs to be stated plainly, because if it is ignored, many people will misinterpret what is happening in their own bodies. When the body passes into the fat-burning phase, many people are surprised by one thing. They do not feel weaker. On the contrary, they feel more alert, quicker in their reactions, and sometimes even mentally sharper than usual. This goes against the common belief that not eating means losing energy. But from a biological perspective, this response is completely logical. When food no longer arrives regularly, the body interprets it as a signal to increase survival capacity, not reduce it. The sympathetic nervous system is mildly activated, noradrenaline rises, and you become more alert and focused. This is not a pathological stress state, but an adaptive, evolutionary one. Throughout human history, not eating never meant lying down and waiting to die. It meant going out to find food. Your body still carries that logic. Alongside fat burning, another quiet process is also taking place at the cellular level. When the body is not constantly digesting, it begins to clear out old, inefficient structures. Damaged proteins and aging cellular components are broken down and reused. This is not something mystical, but a fundamental biological mechanism that helps maintain cellular quality over time. And what is notable is that this mechanism is strongly activated only when the flow of external energy is temporarily paused. Another real experience many people report is that, over time, they become less dominated by thoughts about food. They no longer count the hours to the next meal or feel an urgent, must-eat-now sensation. This reflects changes in hunger, hormones, and the brain's reward system. When the body trusts that energy is always available internally, the brain no longer needs to apply constant psychological pressure to seek food. And this is precisely where intermittent fasting becomes fundamentally different from traditional dieting. Dieting often creates a prolonged state of deprivation, where the body is constantly on alert, constantly conserving, constantly resisting. Proper fasting creates intentional periods of rest, long enough for the body to switch states, but not long enough to trigger a collapse response. The difference lies in rhythm, not in harshness. One very practical point needs emphasis. Not everyone experiences the same timing. Some people switch earlier, others later, depending on prior glucose dependence, baseline insulin levels, activity level, and sleep. But the common thread is this: the body learns very quickly when signals are repeated clearly enough. What feels uncomfortable in the first week often softens in the next, not because you are better at enduring it, but because biology has adapted. Ultimately, what this entire sequence invites is not the question, how long can you fast, but a deeper one. Are you giving your body the chance to operate according to its design? When energy no longer arrives constantly from the outside, the body remembers how to self-supply, self-regulate, and self-protect. And many positive changes begin right at that moment, quietly, but very real. And at this point, I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself one very simple yet extremely important question. Which of the sensations we just talked about sounds most like you? Is it the intense hunger that makes you irrationally irritable? Is it the mental fog a few hours after eating? Or is it that strange moment when you don't eat and yet feel more alert? Leave a very short comment, just one sentence, or even a single word. Not to argue right or wrong, but to mark your own experience. When you write it down, your brain begins to see your body as a system with patterns, rather than as something that betrays you for no reason. What I always want viewers to understand is this. Your body is not working against you. It is doing exactly what it was programmed to do based on the signals you have been sending it for years. When the signals change, the response changes. Not by magic, by biology. If you are in the early stage and feel uncomfortable, that does not mean you are weak. It simply means your body is relearning a skill it hasn't used in a long time. And no one relearns without feeling awkward in the beginning. This channel exists for one very clear reason. No hype, no glorifying methods, no selling fear. Just explaining how the human body actually operates in real life when you are busy, when you are stressed, when you are tired, and when you are trying to understand why nothing seems to change despite all your effort. If this kind of content feels different from what you usually watch, slower, deeper, and more respectful of the viewer's intelligence, then hit subscribe. Not for entertainment, but so each week you gain another perspective that helps you work with your body instead of fighting it. And if this video helped you understand even one small thing about yourself, share it with someone you know who is struggling with belly fat, low energy, or a sense of helplessness with their body. Sometimes, what people need is not motivation, but a correct explanation. We'll continue this conversation, going even deeper about how to break a fast without breaking your biology, why fasting feels effortless for some and miserable for others, and how to turn this understanding into a sustainable way of living, not a short-term challenge. And to close, I want you to carry with you one calm thought: no hype, no pressure. Your body has never betrayed you. It has only been absolutely loyal to the signals it has received for many years. Every wave of hunger, every moment of fatigue, every stubborn layer of fat is not a sign of personal failure, but a logical outcome of a biological system doing its protective job. When energy arrives constantly, the body learns to store. When life moves at a frantic pace, it learns to defend. There is no right or wrong here, only adaptation. The most beautiful part of intermittent fasting is not the number on the scale, but the moment you realize your body still remembers how to take care of itself. With time and consistency, it quietly reopens doors that have been closed for a long time without noise, without drama. Real change does not come from forcing yourself to endure more, but from stopping the habit of treating your body as something that needs to be controlled. When you begin cooperating with biology instead of fighting it, many things naturally become lighter. Eating, energy, emotions, and even the way you see yourself. If after this video you don't rush to do anything, don't immediately apply a rigid rule, but simply observe your body a little more carefully. That is already enough, because understanding, when deep enough, leads to the right action on its own. And action that comes from understanding is always more sustainable than any form of force. Your body does not need you to be perfect. It only needs you to listen to it in the right way.